Hello and welcome. On behalf of this oral history project, I am IUN. Selena Lechuga, will be interviewing Dr. Hero Olivey. Do I have your permission to record and share this interview?
You absolutely do.
Okay. To start off, can you tell me about your childhood and family experiences? Where did you grow up?
Sure. So I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up, my first 12 years or so, I was in a tiny little town called Brown Summit, North Carolina, which is outside of Greensboro, which is a city that folks outside of North Carolina may have heard of. It's one of the bigger cities. Um, a fairly standard childhood. I grew up with a sister and a half brother who was a little older than I was. So he was out of the house by the time I was running around. But yeah, I had a pretty typical childhood. Enjoyed school, which I guess is, pretty good since that's what I do for a living now, right? But yeah, I just remember having a childhood filled with, different experiences, and my parents were very open to letting me explore ideas. They didn't try to shield me from the world, which I think ultimately was great for me, that I got to experience things and make up my mind about things on my own.
Um, will you be willing to share anything about your family background?
Sure. So my mother's family was in North Carolina for many generations. In fact, the hardware store. That's what I'm trying to say. The hardware store Lowe's started out as a tiny little hardware shop in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, and it was started by my great grandfather. Yep, he's not Mr. Lowe. I don't have that kind of money, but his store eventually became Lowe's, and it's still headquartered in North Wilkesboro, which is where my mother's family was from. My dad's family actually was a more recent immigration to North America. His background is British. So my dad's family is mostly British. And my first ancestor to come over actually was my great great grandfather on my dad's side, first to Canada, and then eventually they wound up in New York State. So a lot of my dad's family actually lives in New York State. Like I said, my mom's family all are originated in North Carolina.
That's great. Do you have any family traditions that were passed down?
Oh gosh, I think we do sort of the standard, gather for Thanksgiving and gather for Christmas, and we cook certain things. I remember as a child, I one time was nearly disowned from the family because as I was taking the Christmas food out to the car to drive to my grandmother's house, um, I accidentally dropped the sweet potato pudding. And boy, was I in trouble, because everybody every year looked forward to that sweet potato pudding. But I still wound up getting Christmas gifts. So it was all okay in the end. But yeah, a lot of our traditions were around holidays. My extended family, I didn't see a lot of the year. My cousins and aunts and uncles, but every year at Christmas and Thanksgiving, we always had a big to do at my grandparents' house. And then once my grandparents had passed, we still did that for a few years. My aunt took over the reins. But I think that's what a lot of our tradition is about. It's about gathering and warmth and just being with each other.
If you don't mind me asking, is there a funny or memorable family story that you remember?
Oh gosh, trying to think of one that others might find amusing. I am the youngest on all sides. I'm the youngest sibling. I'm the youngest cousin on both sides of my family. So I'm the baby, right? So the first year after graduate school, I went to one of my cousin's weddings, and it was being held on Bald Head Island, which is on the coast of North Carolina. And I happened to be there with some friends from graduate school. We'd met the first year and were chummy and decided to spend a week at the North Carolina coast, just sort of vacationing after that first very hard year of graduate school. And one of my aunts leaned up to me right before the wedding and she said, "So are you feeling the pressure to get married?" And at this point, I was not out as being gay to my family, at least not to my extended family. So I had chosen for graduate school rather than staying close. I had been accepted at Duke, which is only about an hour from where I grew up, but I was also accepted at Vanderbilt. And I thought, I've never really lived more than, an hour and a half from my family. It might be a nice time to explore and sort of be on my own. And so I was very grateful for that decision that day, because I leaned back to my aunt when she said, you feeling the pressure to get married? And just was able to say to her, the pressure is much less 500 miles away.
Can you tell me about your spiritual beliefs?
Sure. So I grew up in the Lutheran Church. The what is today, it wasn't at the time, but it's now the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or ELCA, as opposed to like the Missouri Synod or the Wisconsin Synod Lutheran churches, and was baptized. I was old enough when I was baptized that I remember it. I don't remember it in great detail, but I wasn't like an infant at baptism. And I actually, as I grew up and became really interested in science, sort of became disenchanted with religion. And so during most of high school, I would say, and most of college, honestly, I would say that I was atheist, agnostic, somewhere in that camp. But in college, because I wanted to get extra money to, afford those luxuries like, food, textbooks, that kind of thing. I took a job at the Presbyterian Church downtown as a singer. I've been a singer my whole life. And so I was one of their paid singers. So every Sunday I would show up, I would sing at 2 services, and basically I was just there to sing. I didn't really care about the words. But I don't know, around about my sophomore year, and it probably had something to do with my father passing. My father was 55 when I was born. Like I said, I was really the youngest. And so he passed away when I was a sophomore in college. And I think that got me sort of thinking about, what's beyond this life? Is there God? Have I rejected this idea out of hand, and inappropriately so? So I started thinking about it. And I remember singing at Presbyterian Church thinking, maybe there's something to this. And over the years, I wound up taking a job at an Episcopal church, which I found to be much more to my liking in terms of their theology and beliefs. No offense to the Calvinists out there, but Calvinism is not my cup of tea in terms of theology. So as a graduate student, I went from, again, working as a paid singer at an Episcopal church to becoming a member of that Episcopal church, a volunteer in the choir. And since then, I have gone on to serve on the lay leadership of 3 different Episcopal parishes. And I was even the warden, which is basically the lay or non-ordained leader of my parish in Chicago for a while. So I do consider myself a Christian by belief. Do I believe all tenets of Christianity? No, I don't think anybody does. And I do align myself very squarely with the Episcopal Church. It's a very progressive church. It's a very LGBTQIA plus friendly organization in the United States. Other churches we're in communion with around the world, maybe not so much, but in the United States, it's a very progressive denomination. I've had many very helpful, very spiritually guideful. I don't know if guideful is a word, but they helped guide me in my spiritual journey. Many priests who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and some wonderful straight priests as well. So I don't actively attend a church right now, but I do still consider myself to be a Christian, and specifically an Episcopalian.
So you mentioned you sang in church.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something you learned when you were a kid, or?
Yeah, so my father had a very interesting career. He was a professional trumpeter for many years, and like I said, he started his professional career in the late 30s, early 40s, right around World War II, because he was born in 1918. So he played with all kinds of big band outfits. And so music has always been a very important part of my family, and was an important part of my childhood. We used to go see my dad play with the band he played at the local supper club. That was sort of his thing. But yeah, I sang from an early age. I sang in church choir. I remember that Lutheran church I grew up in, we had the adults on one side of the sanctuary, and then the kids on the other. And there was this one woman in the adult choir whose job was to give the evil eye to any kids who were misbehaving in the youth choir. But I always enjoyed that, and I enjoyed being in the pageants, and I always sang in choirs in school. And I always had sort of a natural talent for singing. And so, yeah, I started in high school. Occasionally I would substitute for my choir director. He was the music director at an Episcopal church, as it turns out. I'd sometimes sing with his wife because she was the music director at a different church. And again, if she needed a paid singer for a week, she'd hire me. And then I did that throughout most of college. But yeah, it definitely goes back to when I was a kid. I don't remember not singing. It's that sort of embedded in my childhood.
Good. So touching on your early education, what high school did you attend? How was your student experience there?
So I actually enjoyed high school. I went to Walter Hines Page High School in Greensboro. We were the Pirates, and ironically, most of the schools I've either been at as a student or affiliated with as a faculty member have had red and white as their color schemes, including my high school. Um, like I said, I enjoyed high school. I took a lot of AP courses, which worked out really well for me when I went to college. I basically walked in the door as a sophomore, so that was nice. But I went to a high school that at the time I think was very highly ranked in terms of academic achievement. I was lucky that we had funding to have lots of AP science courses, AP history courses. Um, I participated in academic competitions, high IQ ball, science Olympiad, sort of all the the geeky stuff. I didn't do the math competitions. I'm not a math person, never have been. But I think I was very well prepared for not only college but also my career by the support I got and the knowledge I gained in my high school experience.
Um, what was your favorite subject? Has it always been biology?
It wasn't, interestingly enough, until I was a junior in high school. I was convinced that I was going to be an engineer. I was going to go to NC State, which was the premier and preeminent, I should say, engineering school in North Carolina. Well, Duke might think theirs is, but I always thought NC State's was. And that's what I was sure I wanted to do. And then my junior year, two things happened. One, I took AP biology and realized I really, really liked it. And two, I sort of came to the realization that I could barely work a screwdriver and a screw. So maybe engineering was not,
Yeah.
it's a lot of math, which is also, should have been a pretty clear indicator, was not my cup of tea. So yeah, once I got into AP biology, I really just sort of took off. It really sort of felt like a natural fit. And so, yeah, after that pretty much became my favorite subject. And, I wound up majoring in microbiology. And honestly, the only reason I majored in microbiology was because I didn't understand the difference between that and molecular biology. But it worked.
Right. Did your early education play a role in coming to IUN or pursuing a higher education?
It definitely influenced me pursuing higher education. I mean, there was never a doubt from the time I was in elementary school that I was going to go to college. I'm the first person in my immediate family to complete a 4-year degree. Both my parents started college. Neither of them finished. My sister didn't. Neither my sister nor my brother went to a 4-year college. But it was just always talked about. It was always assumed because I always did well in school, and so it was assumed I would get some scholarships, which I did, which was very helpful. In terms of coming to IU, that was more about opportunity. In terms of, when I went into the job market looking for my first faculty job, I looked all over the country. I was living in Chicago at the time. I was a research fellow at the University of Chicago, wanted to stay in the area, really loved the Chicago area. But when you're an academic on the job market, you kind of have to go where the jobs are. You can't always pick and choose. But I happened to meet a former colleague of mine, a guy named Pete Avis, who was on the biology faculty until he left a few years ago. And he came and gave a talk at the University of Chicago, and I went to it, and he and I started talking, and he said, hey, we're going to be putting a faculty position up in the next few months, so keep an eye out for it. So I was really lucky that I met him and knew about the position. But again, I didn't really, when I first started grad school, I was sure that I wanted to do what I saw my professors in grad school doing, which was running a lab, competing for the very precious federal research money to run that lab and pay your salary and pay your technicians and pay your students. And I thought teaching would be a very minor part of what I did. Those folks, they do an excellent job researching, and many of them are great teachers, but it's not their focus. It's something they do above and beyond their main focus, which is research and training graduate students and research fellows. But over the course of my graduate career, I decided, research is fine. It's not what I wanted my focus to be. And I started getting some teaching experience, especially as a research fellow at University of Chicago, and really found that I liked that. So the reason I'm here really comes down to the fact that it was a great opportunity that I was a good fit for, and this place offered me the balance I wanted, where I had the opportunity and the time to do some research, but my focus would be on teaching and helping students, which is really my passion.
Tell me about what you decided to major in and how you decided on whether or not this is what you wanted to pursue.
Absolutely. So, as I alluded to earlier, when I went to orientation, and this was back in the days where there was no online when I went to college, right? There was basically AOL and CompuServe. So to register, we called a phone number, and we got something called a busy signal. Which now we're getting to the point, people, what is a busy signal? So the point is, I had to register for classes. And in order to do that, I had to have this magic code. And when you went to orientation, they gave you the magic code when you went to the table for your major. So I thought I was a biology major. I thought that's what I'd signed up for. I went to the biology table, and they said, we don't see you. Oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. New college student, don't know what's going on. And they said, well, hold on, let's look at the others. They said, oh, you're a microbiology major. I said, oh yeah, because I wanted to do this thing I'd heard of called genetic engineering. I didn't really know what it was, but it was engineering, and I'd wanted to be an engineer before, and it was genetics, and that was biology. So genetic engineering, microbiology, yeah, that's the same thing, right? It's not. But so I really wound up as a microbiology major through dumb luck and misunderstanding. But once I got in and started taking the classes, I found it really fascinating, like thinking how bacteria work, thinking how viruses work, their impact on human health. Like one of the best courses I took as an undergraduate was called food microbiology. And to this day, when I go in a new restaurant, I go into the men's room and I make sure the hot water works. Because so much foodborne illness comes from people not washing their hands after they have done what we go to the restroom to do. So I always check that. If the hot water isn't working, I'm pretty much getting iced tea. That's about it.
Are you associated with any campus or organizations?
So up until this year, I was the advisor for the biology club. So I stepped down from that this year because I just had so many things on my plate. I didn't feel I could give it the time it deserved. I am still, though, the tournament director for our Science Olympiad regional tournament that we run at IU Northwest. This upcoming year, I think, will be our 23rd year doing it. I haven't done it that whole time. I haven't been here that long. But that's a really important organization that I'm affiliated with here on campus. And I look forward to the tournament every spring.
How long have you been at IUN?
So this is my 15th year. I started in fall of 2010.
Can you share any special memory from your campus experience?
You know, I think one of the most special experiences to me, and it's sort of like an every year thing, has become the freshman induction ceremony. And it's because we started it because we thought, it'd be nice to have, I shouldn't say we, I was not part of the group who started it, but my understanding is the reason it was started, was to help give incoming freshmen sort of a sense of belonging, right? It's you're coming from high school, it's a really different experience. You're coming into, even though we're not that big a school, still, it's a lot of students, right? And I think you can feel like you get lost sometimes. And so having that time set aside the first week of school to bring the freshmen in, to really celebrate them, to say, hey, we're glad you're here. We want you to do well. And to see so many of my colleagues take time to put on that really, especially in August, put on that really heavy black polyester, academic regalia, but go across the street to the Arts and Sciences building and really cheer on those freshmen. I think it's really meaningful, and I hope it's as meaningful for those students as it is for the faculty and staff who attend, because it really is exciting for us to see those new faces and think, some of these are students, I may have already seen them that day in a class, or I may see them in the next year or two in a class. Even if they're not my majors, I teach classes that non-biology majors take, so I might see them in one of those. So that's really become one of my favorite campus experiences, is that freshman induction ceremony every year.
What advice will you give to incoming freshmen?
The first piece of advice I would give is meet your professors. I think one of the things that students often, a trap they fall into, let's say, is they think the professors are this unapproachable entity, right? And can't be bothered, can't waste their time working with them. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. Most of my faculty colleagues They really want students to come by. They want to help you understand the material better. They want to, work with you to help you. So I wish students would take advantage of that more. The other piece of advice I would give is come to class. It's when when you're transitioning from high school where people are keeping track of where you are and you check in for attendance and blah, blah, blah. When you get to college, it can feel, oh, some classes, maybe they're not checking that. Maybe I don't have to go. The lectures are recorded. I don't have to wake up at 8 in the morning and go. I tell you, you really miss something by not being in that learning community. And that's ultimately what classrooms are. They're communities that foster learning. And you're going to get the most out of that community if you're there and you participate with that community. One message I always try to instill in my students is the only time being wrong in the classroom is a problem is when you're taking a test. Giving wrong answers to questions I might ask in class or making a statement that's not quite correct, that's how we learn. That's how we learn. So I think the third piece of advice will be don't be afraid to be wrong, because we all are from time to time, and that's how we learn.
What do you value most about IUN?
I value most about IUN its focus on student success. And I've been here long enough that I can really appreciate how much of a change that has been. I don't like to admit this, but it's the truth, and I think truth is important. I think 10 years ago, a good number of faculty would say, hey, this is what we expect students to do. If they're ready to do that, fine. If they're not, too bad. I think in the past 10 years, really, we have focused so much on getting rid of that attitude, realizing that's not the right attitude. That's not the most helpful attitude. It's a deficit mindset. Some people can do it, some people can't. Too bad. We now are increasingly seeing in our policies and our teaching that we are adopting a stance of, if you're here, we want you to succeed. We're going to help you succeed. We're going to do everything we can to help you succeed. And I cherish that the faculty of this institution, so many of my colleagues, even though 10 years ago they might have been of the other mindset, they've really latched onto this idea that, yeah, we really are here for every student. It doesn't matter which high school you've come from. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. We're here to help you do better. You're capable of that. Every student brings their own unique strengths and unique skills, or I should say combination of strengths and skills. And so rather than dismiss students who don't have these skills we might have thought we needed, we say, wait, maybe you don't have these strengths yet, but you have these others. How can we use those strengths to get you where you need to be? And seeing how my colleagues have embraced that and embodied that in their courses, and as part of my job, I look regularly, how many students are we graduating? How many students are being successful in our courses? The impact over the past 10 years from those changes is really tremendous. And I think that's probably what I value most about this place, is the fact that we have really committed to being student focused, and we are not just talking the talk, we are walking the walk.
What advice do you have for future students?
So I think for future students, I would give the same 3 pieces of advice, but thinking in terms of future, I think one of the things that has the potential to impact education in ways we haven't seen probably in a generation is artificial intelligence. And I would caution students to think about artificial intelligence not as a substitute for work, but as a tool to help them work. In the same way that a calculator is not a substitute for learning multiplication tables, right? Yes, if I need to multiply complex numbers, I grab a calculator too, right? But there's going to be times when you need to do simple calculations, and you may not always have access to a calculator. If you've memorized those multiplication tables, that's going to help you out, right? AI is a tool, just like a calculator is a tool, just like a word processor is a tool. It's a very advanced tool, but it's not a replacement for your own intelligence, for your own investigation. Ultimately, what drives knowledge is curiosity. And if you give that curiosity away and let the machine be curious in place of you being curious, that's going to impact your ability to do well, not just in school, but in life. That curiosity is so important.
What do you wish that students knew more about the resources that IUN has to offer?
I think the resource I wish they knew more about was their own faculty. I mean, honestly, I talk to my colleagues, and none of us are saying, I have so many students coming to office hours. I can't get out of here. It's like I have to turn them away. Nobody says that, right? Nobody says that. So that's the resource I wish students knew more about, or at least would take more advantage of. Thinking sort of more broadly, we have so many programs that will help students do better through like tutoring, peer mentoring, that kind of thing. I wish students knew more about that and took more advantage of those. I think sometimes students come in and think asking for help is a sign of weakness, or people will think they're not as bright because they're asking for help. And again, boy, that's just a life skill. Learning to ask for help is such a valuable life skill. And I was going to do the same thing. I used to think, no, I just have to power through it. I can't ask for help. I said I would do this. I don't do that anymore, because what winds up happening is you do a bad job. So you disappoint people, you disappoint yourselves, and you burn yourself out. So use those resources and don't be afraid to ask for help from your faculty, from tutors, from peer mentors, right? From your advisor. All of them are there to help you, and all of them want to see you succeed.
What would you say is your biggest accomplishment, whether in life or at IUN?
Oh gosh. I think my proudest accomplishment from IUN is every time I get an email from one of my former students who's now a practicing physician, a practicing dentist, practicing nurse, knowing that I've helped them in some small way. I mean, they have earned that. They have worked for that. Don't get me wrong. But when they email me and say, the things I learned in your class were so helpful, or the way you helped me learn how to study, helped me be prepared for my medical school classes, my dental school classes. To me, that's sort of my greatest achievement. Um, I think professionally, I was inducted into FACET, which is an organization for teaching excellence across the IU system, and that for me personally was one of my an accomplishment I felt really good about. It was something I had wanted for years, and I'd applied a couple of times and not made it. And so making it into FACET has been a great experience. I should say that's also an organization that's beyond just this campus, but I should say that's a organization not only am I affiliated with, I'm actually the associate director of it on campus.
To wrap up, is there anything else you would like to add or share that has not been discussed?
Oh gosh, you've done such a good job. You've asked such good questions, and I really appreciate it. They've been really good. I would just say that there is just no other place I'd rather be. I'm really lucky that I don't get up every day thinking, "Oh, I have to go to work today." I'm not saying I don't ever have those mornings. Okay, let's be honest. But it's not because of where I am. It's because all jobs. Every once in a while, you have to do something that's unappealing or unappetizing. But I'm very lucky that I come home at the end of the day, and even though I'm often exhausted, I feel like I've done good work. I feel like I've helped make the world a better place in some small way. And not everybody gets to say that. And I appreciate how lucky I am to be able to say that. So, and like I said, I think I could teach anywhere, but I'm glad to be teaching here. I think we have some of the greatest students around, and I really love what I do.
Well, thank you for your time.